Welcome again. I'd like to share with you some recent research on the aspect of cataract formation in Alzheimer's as a potential risk factor. So I call this particular blog The Eyes Have It. And it's really interesting when you look at the structure of the brain, a little bit like this analogy with computers. There are peripherals which feed into, for example, a computer. We have printers, we have cameras, we have keyboards, we have lots of different devices that really feed into what we call the CPU, or central processing unit of a computer. And much in the same way, our brain has input from all these senses, which really touch literally the brain. So we have the eyes, for example. We have the nose, and right in this area right here, around this area, it's called the ethmoid. There are actually very fine structures we talk about in craniosacral therapy called the cribriform plates, which actually help transmit molecules of air into the brain, create an electrochemical reaction, and that's how we actually process smell. And a lot of our sensory processing deals with that in terms of processing information known as smell. Of course, there's hearing, very important, and there's a straight shot into the brain following this membrane system that lines in a vertical and horizontal fashion the brain itself. And craniosacral therapy is found to be pretty effective in many cases in working with things like tinnitus, ear problems, things where people are a little bit oversensitive to input. And then, of course, there's taste, there's touch. So all these different senses really input, and there are cranial nerves in the base of the brain that even help transmit this information from the periphery of the body right into the brain itself. So it's interesting that all of these sensory pathways can be pathways of migration, potentially, of problems into the brain as well. So, which brings us to some new research from the British Journal of Ophthalmology, which looked at patients with Alzheimer's disease and cataracts. And they found, at least in certain cases, there's some cataracts in the eyes which reflect the Alzheimer's plaque in the brain. And then they also found there was a vascular aspect to what was going on in the eyes, which seemed to reflect some insufficiency or something going on in the eyes, which might be mimicked. And we'll talk about this in other blogs as well, in terms of vascular problems, which are reflected in the brain. So they found in these cases there was a higher incidence of memory problems with these folks in the survey that's done. So what does this mean? What this means is that there's the potential of us being able to identify people that are at higher risk for Alzheimer's if we look in certain cases and in certain cataracts, or certain types of cataracts, but at least one type seems to correlate with a higher incidence of Alzheimer's disease. And so the folks that wrote this up in the journals thought, well, maybe this could be another screening mechanism to show people when they're at risk. So from my point of view in doing research, I was thinking about, well, what is the mechanism for migration that might possibly be reflected as this periphery of the eyes is reflected in the brain, this peripheral part of the nervous system. So one thing is that as a theory, this is simply a theory, that the amyloid-like plaques or deposition of protein, that it becomes too much, that's why the eyes get foggy, in the eyes actually could migrate down the optic nerve straight into the brain. There's a whole sensory processing part in the back of the brain, which really looks at vision. So this might be a migration pathway. And then the other part, which the study really reflects on as well, is it also reflects vascular insufficiency. And for a number of reasons, if there's a diminishment of vascular flow in the eyes that also may be mirrored and reflected in the brain, that also shows that maybe when you're getting less flow of blood and oxygenation in the brain, that can be the pathway for an opportunistic formation of these plaques in the brain as well. So it's just interesting to see that even in this newest research, looking at the sensory mechanism, especially in the eyes, we may have a way of looking at pre-screening for Alzheimer's, and with various protocols that we've also developed in craniosacral therapy for seniors, one of the things that we're looking at is ways to specifically address the visual system and treat the eyes as well. So from one end or another, this may be able to help in terms of our work in helping to prevent and reverse this disease. So thanks for listening. We'll see you soon with another blog.